Once again, this is Michael Orman, and welcome to another episode of Poetry on the Patio. I'm back out here in my patio, and we're here discussing poetry. Today, we'll be discussing the works of O'Hara, Bly, Kinnell, and Ashbery. So sit back, and I hope you enjoy. Bye. The first poet we're talking about this episode is Frank O'Hara. I know I look like crap right now because, frankly, my allergies are acting up, my eczema's flared up. I'm just not in a good place right now. But work has to be done. There's this quote in here that I find very interesting from Frank O'Hara about poetry. Too many poets, he protests, act like a middle-aged mother trying to get her kids to eat too much cooked meat and potatoes with drippings. I don't give a damn whether to eat or not. Force feeding leads to excessive thinness. Nobody should experience anything they don't need to. If they don't need poetry, bully for them. I like the movies too. And after all, only Whitman and Crane and Williams of the American poets are better than the movies. That's my view on most things is, if somebody's not interested, don't force it on them. But of course, that's like the exact opposite of the American school system. Is they force so many subjects onto students that they don't frankly need or don't care about or will ever care about. Like, for instance, they tried to force me to take physics when I was in high school. And I fought to get out of it. I am never going to need to know about physics. It's an area that does not interest me. I am terrible at mathematics. Or in English, say your maths. Very terrible at it. And it was just a recipe for failure. Whereas my goal is to go on eventually to law school, and I love English and writing, so right now I'm double majoring in English and political science. That makes sense for my path. So in a way, poetry makes sense for my path, because it's about critical analysis. What I find interesting is that Frank O'Hara has two different poems. They're each named Poem. The first one goes, the eager note on my door said, "Call me. Call when you get in." So I quickly threw a few tangerines into my overnight bag, straightened my eyelids and shoulders, and headed straight for the door. It was autumn by the time I got around the corner. Oh, all unwilling to be either pertinent or bemused, but the leaves were brighter than grass on the sidewalk. Funny, I thought, that the lights are on this late and the hall door open. Still up at this hour, a champion, gel ally player like himself. Oh fie, oh shame. What a host, oh zealous. And he, there, in the hall, flat on a sheet of blood that ran down the stairs. I did appreciate it. There are few hosts who so thoroughly prepare to greet a guest, only casually invited, and that several months ago. So I'm wondering, did this person invite him over to his house several months ago and died in the process? I guess that's a very interesting way to greet a guest. To be all corpse-like and have your blood and fluids going everywhere. At least is how I interpreted this poem. If you got something different out of it, let me know below. I'd be happy to discuss this stuff with you. And I know a lot of us in the United States probably don't know what the word "fi" means. I remember they touched on it in an episode of Simpsons. Because Bart was going to do his major prank where he was going to make the Springfield letters over the town spell out the word "fi," which he said was like the ultimate cuss word. Which "fi" is basically an interjection, which interjection is a word that really does not have a direct meaning. It's like a filler or like for emotion. It's like boing, zoinks. Oh crap. Stuff like that. Or like in Canada, they say, oh, I'm talking about, eh? A would be your interjection. The other poem that is named Poem goes, at night Chinamen jump on Asia with a thump, while in our willful way, we in secret play. Affectionate games and bruise our knees like China's shoes. The birds push apples through, grass the moon turns blue. The apples roll beneath our buttocks like a heath, full of Chinese thrushes, flushed from China's bushes. We love at night, birds sing out of sight. Chinese rhythms beat through us in our heat. The apples and the birds move us like soft words. We couple in grace on that mysterious race. Okay. On the surface, he talks a lot about China, but I think he's talking about how we relate to, as Americans, how we would relate to the Chinese. They're foreign and mysterious to us, but yet in some ways, they are familiar and not so strange. There's another poem in here, which I'm not going to read because, we're kind of strapped for time. But it's called Why I'm Not a Painter. In which he goes into basically why he is not a painter and why poetry appeals to him instead. And how poetry and painting are similar in some ways. In the next section, we'll be discussing the poetry of Bly. Hope you stick around. This section of this episode is devoted to the poet Robert Bly. Bly is what we would call, let's see, a prime mover to become known as a deep image school. Non-surrealists who used images to gain access to unconscious or spiritual levels of experience. So let's see how that goes. The first poem I'm going to read is The Great Society. Dentists continue to water their lawns, even in the rain. Hands developed with terrible labor by apes hang from the sleeves of evangelists. There are murdered kings in the light bulbs outside movie theaters. The coffins of the poor are hibernating in piles of new tires. The janitor sits troubled by the boiler, and the hotel keeper shuffles the cards of insanity. The president dreams of invading Cuba. Bushes are growing over the outdoor grills, vines over the yachts and the leather seats. The city broods over ash cans and darkening mortar. On the far shore at Coney Island, dark children play on the chilling beach. A sprig of black seaweed, shells, a sky full of birds, while the mayor sits with his head in his hands. On the surface, this looks like a very kind of like a social commentary about excess, and also kind of paints like kind of what could be interpreted as a post-apocalyptic view of the society. The dentist watering even though it is raining. That's a sign of excess. You know, the lawn doesn't need water to be watered if it's raining. You're just doing too much. Especially in where I live in San Antonio, Texas, a lot of times we have drought restrictions. To us, that would just be ludicrous. Water is in such short supply. Why the hell would you water your lawn when it's raining? And as far as the murder kings and the light bulbs and the coffins of the poor and new tires, I think that it's talking about how industry is built on the backs of the less fortunate and of the lower classes. In which the Great Society was the keynote slogan of Lyndon B. Johnson's presidential campaign in 1964. which the next poem I'm going to read is called A Week After Your Death. I dreamt last night you lived nearby, not dead at all, but safe, in a blacksmith's storage room with bolts and nails and bends from floor to ceiling. You came and brought me an ivory jar, holding a precious fluid, which I took. I knew it meant the time had come, but I let you leave. Later, a man pushed open the door and threw your body down, a wizened, astonishing small body, rope still tied around the neck. Awoke and cried to my wife, he didn't die that way. There was no rope. All that is wrong, she said. In your dream, he did. Wow. That is a lot. In which this poem, I think it deals with accepting the death of somebody close to you, in which I'm going to go on a limb and say that it is the death of a child. And sometimes in our dreams, especially, I remember after my dad died, I would have dreams where he was up walking around, and for some reason, he wasn't dead, but he was supposed to be dead, and was trying to figure out what to do. Because we had cashed his insurance policy, his insurance check. I was like, damn, you're not dead. Why are you here? Now we've committed insurance fraud. And then sometimes the death would be different in the dreams. Like I think here, he dreamed him dying differently. I think that's why in the dream, his wife says, in your dream he did. And that the rope around the neck could be like a metaphor, losing air. Or a sudden death. Because, when somebody's hung, the rope is supposed to break their neck, and they would instantly die and asphyxiate. Possibly sever the spinal cord. What are your thoughts? Let me know below. And next section will be devoted to the works of Kinnell. Hi, this section is for Galway Kinnell. He was the son of Irish immigrants who grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. And at first he started with more traditional styles of prose, with his, not necessarily prose, but traditional styles of poetry. And then he started going to more experimental after being influenced by the works of Walt Whitman. One of his more traditional works is called First Song, which I'm going to read to you right now. Then it was dusk in Illinois. The small boy, after an afternoon of carting dung, hung on the rail fence, a sapped thing, weary to crying. Dark was growing tall, and he began to hear the pond frogs all, calling on his ear with what seemed their joy. Soon their sound was pleasant for a boy, listening in the smoky dusk, in the nightfall of Illinois. And from the fields 2 small boys came bearing cornstalk violins, and they rubbed the cornstalk bows with resins. And the 3 sat scraping of their joy. It was now fine music. The frogs, the boys, did in the towering Illinois twilight make, and the dark spite of a shoulder's ache, a boy's hunched body loved out of a stalk, the first song of his happiness, and the song woke his heart into darkness and into the sadness of joy. Which, it's a very, I think the poem points back, has a sense of nostalgia, pointing back to a time long gone. Back when the narrator was a child living in rural Illinois, and the simple joys, like hearing the sounds of the frogs and being entertained by the sounds of rubbing corn stalks together. It kind of reminds me of my childhood in Louisiana. We would hear at night katydids singing, which I think katydids, most people call them locusts or cicadas. Anyway, I also remember the lightning bugs flying all around. They're different colors in the night. and going up on the levee, walking around the levee and fishing with a pole out of the Red River. Yes, I know it sounds like some Mark Twain bullshit, but it was an aspect of my childhood. Now, I'm going to read a poem that he wrote back in 1994, which has more of his experimental style. Let me see if I can flip this over so you can see what it looks like, what I mean by his experimental style. As you can see, it's not the conventional style of a poem. He has a line here, and then there's an indentation. There's 2 lines, an indentation, 2 lines, indentation, 2 lines, indentation, and then here it reads more like a paragraph. There's an indentation, and then we go back to the form. This poem is called Sheffield Ghazal for Driving West, which the Sheffield Ghazal is a lyric genre of Persian and Arabic poetry dating back to the 7th century. Among its requirements are thematic discontinuity and the appearance of the poet's name in the penultimate line, which he does achieve this. The poem goes, a tractor trailer carrying 24 crushed automobiles overtakes a tractor trailer carrying a dozen new. Oil is a form of waiting. The eternal combustion engine converts the stasis of millennia into motion. Cars howl on rain-wetted roads. Airplanes rise through the downpour and through us the blue sky. The idea of the airplane subverts earthly life. Computers can deliver nuclear explosions to precisely anywhere on Earth. A lightning bolt is made entirely of error. Erratic Mercuries and errant cavaliers wander the highways. A girl puts her head on a boy's shoulder. They are driving west. The windshield wipers wipe. Homesickness one way, wanderlust the other, back and forth. This happens to your father, to you, Galway, sick to stay. See right there? He put his first name, Galway Kinnell. Yes, sick to stay, longing to come up against the ends of the earth and climb over. I think this poem talks about how everything is kind of like a dichotomy, in a way, or anachronism, which, if you don't know those words, I recommend you open up a dictionary or Google, because it's always good to learn new words. And then after you learn the meaning of anachronism, look up Girl Anachronism by, I think it's by the Dresden Dolls. Good song. You know, I love the juxtaposition of how some things are an error, yet some things are precise. And how one way you have homesickness, the other way you have wanderlust, and how the wipers go back and forth. And I think that shows how the average traveler feels. You know, part of them is homesick, yet part of them is open to the adventure. I know I kind of feel that way when I'm traveling. You know, some aspects I miss my home, but yet part of me never wants to leave. And just wants to continue on the path that I'm on and to explore more and see more, learn more, engage my 5 senses and more. The next section is devoted to John Ashbery, which will be the final section. This final section is devoted to the works of John Ashbery. John Ashbery is described as a Central American poet, which I know Central was not capitalized, so I guess that means like Middle America. The first poem I'm going to read of his is called Some Trees. These are amazing, each joining a neighbor, as though speech were a still performance, arranging my chance to meet as far as this morning. From the world as green with it, you and I are suddenly what the trees try to tell us we are, that their merely being there means something that soon we may touch, love, explain. And glad not to have invented such comeliness, we are surrounded, a silence already filled with noises, a canvas on which it merges, A chorus of smiles, a winter morning, placed in puzzling light, and moving. Our days put on such reticence. These accents seem their own defense. Hmm, this is a complicated one. I'm not exactly sure what he is trying to get at, but I know there's lots of imagery of trees, in which you think about it, the trees have been here, for most trees have been here longer than we have on this earth, so they would carry a certain wisdom. Especially, under Native American beliefs, they believe the trees carried all kinds of wisdom and information. Like, you ever watch Pocahontas, there's grandmother Willow. The next poem is The Tennis Court Oath. What had you been thinking about, the face studiously bloodied, heaven-blotted region? I go on loving you like water, but there's a terrible breath in the way all of this. You were not elected president, yet won the race. All the way through fog and drizzle, when you read it, was sincere the coast, stammered with unintentional villages. The horse drains fatigued, I guess. The calls, I worry. The water beetle head, why of course, reflecting all. Then you redid. You were breathing. I thought going down to mail this, of the kettle, you jabbered, as easily in the yard. You come through, but are incomparable. The lovely tent mystery. You don't want surrounded the real you dance. In the spring there was clouds. The mulatress approached in the hall, the lettering easily visible along the edge of the Times. In a moment the bell would ring, but there was time for the carnation. Laughed here are a couple of other, to one in yon house. The doctor and Philip come over the road, turning in toward the corner of the walls, his hat on, reading it carelessly, as if to tell you your fears were justified. The blood shifted, you know those walls. Wind off the earth and made him shrink. Undeniably an oboe. Now the young were there. There was candy to the side, the sharp edge of the garment. Yeah, this one's... Because the more I read it, the more I don't understand it. In my poetry, I like for there to be things to unpack, but I don't want to have to unpack a whole house. That's just my personal taste. And with John Ashbery's work, there is a whole house to unpack, and maybe your neighbor's house too. Personally, in this case, I'd be hiring movers and hiring an unpacking service, and maybe Molly maids to clean the place a little bit. Let me know what you think below about the works of John Ashbery. Maybe you might enjoy it. Maybe you have some perspective that I don't. I'd love to hear it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Poetry on the Patio, in which there'll probably be another 1 or 2 episodes, just depending on how things go. And I just want y'all to remember that glitter covers all your sins, and to stay delightfully offensive. Goodbye.